Hello. Welcome to CSS Lesson 1. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the basics of CSS. Now, we've been dealing with CSS a little bit when we talked about the style attribute. However, now we're going to learn about the style tag, which is going to be an example of internal CSS. So if you don't remember the different methods of CSS, that's being inline, internal, and external, I recommend you go and watch that video again. So let's go ahead and ask ourselves a question. What does CSS do again? Well, CSS stylizes and changes our HTML elements by creating rules that control how the elements are actually displayed. So that's a really powerful tool because HTML by itself is going to be pretty bland, and we want to make it, well, not bland. So, for example, if we go ahead and take a look at this is just a normal heading in HTML. This is what it looks like. If we apply some CSS rules to it, we can get something that looks like this. And as you can tell, this is definitely an awesomer heading. Pardon my grammar, I'm a programmer, right? Not a grammar. Anyways, as you can tell, we have some rounded edges. Everything looks a little bit different. We've got a box, which looks a lot better than this plain heading. So that's HTML and CSS. The CSS is being applied to this heading. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this is done. So when you make a rule in CSS, there are two elements. The first element is the selector, which indicates the element or elements the rule will apply to. So then the next one is the declaration, and the declaration specifies the body of the rule where the properties and values are declared. So this is actually what what's going to change in your selector. So if we take a look at this example here, we can see that we have the style tag, and I put type equals text/CSS in quotes just to make sure that the browser understands that the type is text/CSS. Then, as you can see here in blue, is the body selector. So we're selecting the body element of our HTML page. Then inside of curly brackets, we're actually going to put our declaration where there's properties and values. The property is color, value is white, and the background color is black. So property, value, right? So we have technically two declarations in there and one selector. We could have multiple selectors strung together with commas if we wanted to. We could say that for headings we would have the same thing, or for paragraphs we have the same thing. There's a couple different types of selectors though. So the first one we can talk about is just the universal selector, and that specifies a rule for all of the HTML elements. The syntax is just a star and then the curly brackets. I don't usually use this one because applying rules to the entire HTML page gets a little complicated, and I'm not a big fan of this, but you can do it this way if you want. The next way is based on the example that we saw before, is the type selector. It specifies rules for the elements specified by the tag, so H1, H2, P, body, so on. That is an example of a type selector. This is probably the first most common selector, and then the second and third most are the ID attribute selector. So we'll talk about in the next video about specifying using the ID attribute, and this is going to be, the syntax is hashtag then the ID of that individual element. So we can go ahead and choose individual elements, give them the ID attribute, and then they will be selected and the rule will apply there. And the fourth one, this is probably the one that's used the most, is the class attribute selector. Similar to the ID attribute, we can declare the class attribute inside of a tag, or multiple tags, which is where it's often used, as classes is used for multiple tags, IDs, or for single tags. So we can specify attributes about those elements that have that class attribute in it. And we'd say dot, if our class was note, we would say dot note declarations. And we'll look a little bit more in that in the next video. Then we're talking about declarations. A declaration always sits inside those curly brackets following the selector, right? We select it, then we make the declaration, and it is made up of properties and a value. So these examples could be, notice that all these first five are actually, we could do this with the style attribute, and actually we can do any of these with the inline style attribute. That's inline CSS. However, it's much easier to do it with internal CSS because it's easier to change it. You're not inside of the opening tag, and it's kind of awkward. I added a couple other ones here. We can change the border style of the box around our image, around our elements. We can change the height of our element or the width of our element, and those values could be in pixels, percentage of the window, a percentage of the visual window, and that allows it to change, or EM, which is basically 10. If it's 10 EM, that means it's 10 times whatever the font size is. So 2 EM would be 2 times the font size. Those are a couple example values that you can get for your height and width. So let's take another look at an example that I did for H1 here. So I went ahead and set a border style ridge. As you can see, there's a nice ridge here. I aligned the text in the center, had the padding at 15 pixels, the margin at 50 pixels, and watch the, by the way, if you don't understand what padding and margin are, watch the video 3 on this. That's going to be really useful. Set the width to 60% of the visual window, had the border radius, which makes these curved corners here instead of straight. Set the top and bottom width a little thicker. Had the background color orange, and then change the color to white. So notice each of these properties and values are separated by semicolons, and we can string a bunch of these together, as you can see, as I did in this example. I have a bunch of properties and values inside of one declaration, which is all inside these little curly brackets. I could, if I wanted to, go ahead and, oops, don't want a highlighter, I want a pen. I could put a comma here and put another selector. So I could say P. Let's say that's a P. Now this is going to apply to both H1 and P. So I'm going to go and erase that because it's in the way. Alright, so let's go ahead and summarize what we talked about today. So remember, this is the basic CSS video, big broad overview. The next videos will be covering more specifics of this in detail. So, in summary, let me get back on my little, off this eraser. CSS makes rules that determine the style of our HTML code, making it look better. CSS rules are made up of selectors and declarations. There are a number of ways to select where the style will apply, that being the universal selector, type selector, which is tags, ID attributes, or class attributes. All of those are valid ways to select where the style will apply. And then there are many properties and values that can be used inside of the declaration, and you can use multiple inside of one declaration. So one thing I want to mention is that you want to put all of your selectors and property values inside of one style tag. So you would have, if we go back to, let's go back a ways. So you could put multiple, if you wanted to, you could put another selector in here right before this closing style tag. Notice there's the closing style tag. Let's go ahead and add multiple there. You can go ahead and choose H1 there and do a different declaration for that, or P. You can do an unlimited amount of selectors and declarations inside of one style tag. Notice that the opening style tag is here, and then the closing style tag is here. So you can go ahead and select multiple tags or IDs or classes inside of the same style tag. So this is just an example of one selector. We could go ahead and put multiple. We could put a P here, then do the declaration, and we could do multiple inside of that style tag. And I just want to make sure that's clear, and you will use that. That's how I recommend it. If you do multiple style tags, it kind of gets a little confusing, and you can cause some errors that way. So, alright, you should watch the next video on IDs and attributes, and then the third video on boxes, and that should give you a decent start to CSS. So, thanks for coming, and I'll see you later.